I had to assess several different books coming more from contemporary scholars who came way after this German scholar, and who have their own input backed up by later data, like you're saying, and they had different thoughts than Hermann Gunkel. For example, David Tsumura. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. He thought that Tehom in Genesis 1 2, and by the way, Genesis 1 2 will be our main passage for tonight. So David Tsumura taught that Tehom in Genesis 1 2 derived from Tiamat, which is the Babylonian goddess of the primeval ocean. Some later scholars doubted that. Tehom means ocean or water. According to John Day, who is a fine scholar, but I would say probably less conservative than Tsumura, because their ideas, at least according to both books which I read for today, their ideas clash in some cases. So according to John Day, modern scholarly consensus says that it was the Canaanite and not the Babylonian mythology that inspired the Old Testament conflict between Yahweh and the dragon. Is this something that you would agree with, Carrie? Because according to John Day's book, it seems every chapter is filled with these examples how the Canaanite mythology is actually a better source for this topic of chaos camp in the Old Testament, much better than Babylonian.
Well, like I said, it tends to be earlier. Because the time when Babylon was really prominent, it was quite late. It was during and before the exile. So, so yeah, the ideas are earlier than this, but you see the same kinds of ideas in Egypt. You see the same ideas like in every civilization around there. You would have some sort of idea of the chaos and the chaos beast, usually associated with water or the underground or all of these things that we're going to be getting into. So I think that trying to pin down an idea of where it all started, I'm not sure that's really the most fruitful way to approach the topic. Rather, you should be looking at all of these places where it shows up and what do they individually do with the topic. Because each area of time and space will have its own unique twist on the idea or ideas that it's bringing to the table. So I think that's how we should look at it. And like, if you listen to my podcast, I do try and get into some of the information about figuring out the date of Genesis. Is it Mesopotamian? Does it have an Egyptian core? Is it mostly Canaan? All of those, and you see all of it. So I think trying to parse it out and draw out all of these things that specifically, I think that's a bit misguided. And that's kind of what scholars like Gunkel in the 1800s were doing, is they were trying to pick apart the text and say, oh, this part talks about Leviathan, so we're going to ascribe it for this time. And this text over here only mentions sea dragons, so it's talking about this, it's from this time. And this text over here is only talking about the water without personification of a being. And so they're going to strip all of those ideas out and assign those to different time periods. And to some degree, that might be valid, but it's also the case that we had redactors throughout the Bible, we had editors, we had people who compiled things. So it's the same kind of idea of trying to pick apart the text of this was from the priestly writer and this was from the Yahwehist writer and all of that. Like, it's kind of helpful to point out some ideas, but you get into this like, where does that stop? Like, how far do you go? It's not just 4 writers. Now suddenly we have 15 writers. And it's like, well, okay, slow down there. We can't go too fast and furious with that, because like, what is that even going to do for us in the end? We should be reading it as a whole and seeing the themes as well. So there's kind of that, yeah, it's helpful, but how much can you do with it? You're always going to find people who are going to argue, and I don't know. It's just going to be based on their personal like their framework of how they're approaching the text. Like if they think the text was written by all of these different authors, or whether it was a little more broad and fuzzy than that. So